SRC again keep ringing. And so we decided we would go with SRC Private Primary School. And I'll tell you something. It, it is the most awesome decision that I have made, my husband have made for Jishon.
Welcome to the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. This talk show is presented each week by host Alina Lewis and features guests from our Caribbean islands right here on this channel. As we discuss family finances, proverbial principles, child guidance, and academics at home, guests join in weekly to have conversations that give helpful tips about how to be a better parent. Like, subscribe, follow, and share as you tune in each week for new episodes of the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. Hi, good evening, and welcome to the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. We're so excited to have you here this evening because through this platform, what we do is facilitate conversations that give helpful tips about how to be a better parent each day. Today, we're pleased to have two guests in studio with us to discuss autism spectrum disorder and its impact on parents and the wider family unit. Having a child with autism impacts on various aspects of family life, including housekeeping, finances, emotional and mental health of parents. It impacts the marital relationships, physical health of family members, and sometimes even limiting the response to the needs of other children within the family. And this, of course, creates poor sibling relationships. Joining us firstly to chat with us about the impact of an autism diagnosis on the parents and the wider family is Dr. Radica Mahase. Now, Dr. Radica Mahase is a historian by profession. She currently is a senior lecturer in history at the College of Science, Technology, and Applied Arts of Trinidad and Tobago. She is also the founder and one of the directors of Support Autism T&T, an NGO established to create opportunities for those with autism in Trinidad and Tobago. She writes a weekly column in the Trinidad Newsday newspaper on issues focusing on autism and in special needs in general. Dr. Mahase, we appreciate you joining us once again for the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show, as this time we chat about the impact on parents and the wider family. Now, I know last time you were with us, we went in depth, really looking at diagnosis, avenues available for support. But today we really want to zoom in and really be able to chat about parents and the way that diagnosis really affects the family and the wider family and the parents. Yeah. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your program.
So happy that you're willing to come back. I appreciate it so much. And even now, let's take a minute to focus on an autism diagnosis and the psychological, emotional impact. Because, of course, we know so many times once there is an autism diagnosis, parents tend to focus on the child. It's all about the child. But this evening, we want to recognize that we need to focus on the parents and the family as well. So can you share from a psychological, emotional point of view, what does the typical family go through when there is an autism diagnosis?
So first thing I want to say is that the psychological, emotional impact starts even before there's a diagnosis. Because in many cases in Trinidad and Tobago, we have children who are diagnosed quite late. We don't have, because of the waiting period to get an appointment to diagnose and so on, we have children who would be diagnosed as late as 5 and 6 years, sometime much later. So it starts before, and I say this because so many parents recognize that, something is wrong in terms of development with the child, and they start to panic because they don't know where to get help. They don't know who to turn to. They don't know what to do. So that whole psychological impact starts from the time they recognize that something is that their child is not developing at the level that he or she is supposed to, and then that whole issue, the whole problem stepping in, where do I go, what do I do, who do I turn to, and then even if they know that okay, you make an appointment in the pediatrics department, that's a whole next long waiting period. So it starts from then. It starts with parents worrying. It starts with parents not knowing what to do. It starts with the lack of guidance of parents. That's the first thing. The second thing comes when the child is actually diagnosed. That's a whole different set of emotion that the parents now, well, the family on the whole now has to deal with. And I should mention to you, Lena, that before that even happened, we have so many parents who are totally in denial. We have parents who recognize that their children may have problems, but they keep thinking, oh, well, he will grow out of it, or she will learn to talk soon. And then in Trinidad, we have this thing that with boys, especially when the boys at a year and a half, 2 years, they're still not saying words. The common thing is, well, boys take longer to talk than girls. So, you don't need to worry. So we have all these dynamics coming into play that makes it very complicated for parents, that makes it very stressful for parents. And because of the lack of information, because of the lack of education, because parents are not taught about these things, they just don't know what to do. And it's a very emotional, stressful period before the child becomes diagnosed and then when the child is actually diagnosed. And the saddest thing with our system here in Trinidad and Tobago, we don't have any kind of counseling system in place that when a child is diagnosed, parents can immediately receive some kind of counseling or some kind of direction on, what's the next step. Now that your child has been diagnosed, these are the things that you can do. This is where you can go for support. This is what you can get help with. So because we don't have that, parents are basically left to cope on their own. They're left to figure it out on their own. There's no structured process in place to help them cope in any way. And it becomes a very tedious process. And I should mention that is exactly why I started Support Autism T&T, because we recognized that my nephew had development delays from about age 3. But it took us another 5 years before we could have gotten someone to diagnose him, because we didn't know where to go. We didn't know, what to do. And in the process of trying to find somewhere that he could be diagnosed, we realized how many other parents out there were going through that whole process of trying to figure it out on their own. So I was very determined that Support Autism T&T would help parents with that, would be able to at least tell them, here what, you can get your child diagnosed in a public healthcare institution. This is what you need to do. Because there was nobody to tell us those things, and it took us years. And then even when he was diagnosed, it took us another long period to actually get him help, to find a therapist to work with him. Because he was at that stage where he was traumatized to go in any public space. Because when he was 4 years old, he had viral fever and he was hospitalized. And they physically restrained him for the 3 nights and days that he was in the hospital. So when he came out, it took him almost a year before he would, even stop being afraid when somebody entered the room. We constantly had to reassure him that no, nobody's coming for you. Nobody's coming to do you anything. Because he was so traumatized. So he would not go into a therapist's office. He would not go into the pediatrician office. So we had to get someone to come home, even when we had to find a speech therapist who would come home and work with him. And that's the kind of stressful thing that parents go through because there is no directive coming from any relevant ministry, or whether it's the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Education or Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Because we don't have any kind of structure in place, parents are left on their own to figure it out on their own. And that is a very traumatic experience for many parents.
And of course, it makes me glad that we have platforms like the Caribbean Parenting Show that can bring information. So that way, for those parents who are sitting, if they didn't know there was Support Autism T&T, then after watching this program and even last episode where you joined us, they will understand their organization like yours, where they could connect and get some help. So Thank you, Dr. Mahase, for that contribution. And of course, joining us today once again, for those of you who follow with our conversations, you would have met Germaine Lewis. And just to remind and to introduce for those who are new to the program, Germaine has a child who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Her son was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and as a single parent, she has supported him through this journey. Germaine is a Trinidadian born and raised, has migrated to the US and still resides there. And having supported her child through having to deal with this challenge, today he's now a member of the Honor Roll Society and he is in a special education class in middle school. Today, Germaine joins us once again to share a parent's perspective about being able to support a child diagnosed with special needs. So, once again, Germaine, we want to thank you for joining with us and we welcome you to yet another episode.
All
And
right.
even as Dr. Mahase was sharing on the psychological, emotional impact, can you give some information on what that impact was like for you as a mom, as a single parent, having had the diagnosis of the autism spectrum disorder for your son?
So, as a parent, the first thing you think about is, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get through this? Because you think about all the things you have to do, and you have to do it by yourself if you're a single parent. So, and it's not so much of, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this. It's a lot of it is, where do I begin? And for me, we have a lot of resources here in the US, a lot of resources. And with insurance wise, it's a little bit easier to obtain than in Trinidad, as from what I'm hearing from Dr. Mahase. So it's not too bad, but still, it's a lot to deal with because you have to begin somewhere. You have to get the resources. You have to have the insurance to pay for it. You have to basically make yourself available to take them to different therapies. Sometimes you have to work, so you have to work around that. You either have to take time off of work and take them, or you have to rearrange your whole schedule. You have to ask somebody, can you take him to this? Can you take them to that? And it's really not easy. You think about it and you think about it, and then sometimes you're just brain tired because you're thinking, this is my child, I have to help them, and I'm not capable of doing this. Am I capable of doing this?
Yeah, totally understand. I want to pull Dr. Mahase back into the conversation, even as we share some more details about the financial impact. Dr. Mahase,
Um,
hi.
Hi.
Thanks for rejoining. Now, many parents who don't have children diagnosed, who don't have a special needs child, they may not understand that there is a financial impact. And for parents who are now entering this world of special needs, because maybe there is an inclination that something may be different, or there's a diagnosis, what can you share with parents to help them understand the financial impact of having a child diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and how it affects the household?
So the thing about it is every parent want to give their child everything possible. You want to give your child all the opportunities. You want to give your child all the therapies, all the educational opportunities. You want your child to take part in things. So every parent, whether it's a neurotypical child or a special needs child, they want to bring up their child with everything that they could give to them. In the case of a special needs child, in the case of a child with autism specifically, there are so many extra things that parents now need to take into consideration. For example, the main one is the different types of therapies. As I mentioned, it is recommended that a child with autism should get 15 hours of therapy a week. I don't know. Germaine would probably be able to tell us, what it is in the US and how much hours her son goes to therapy. But generally, we don't have therapies available in the public sector. So the first extra cost to that family, to parents, is the cost of therapies. As I mentioned before, it costs anywhere between $300 to $800 a session. And many parents simply cannot afford that. Many parents try to break their back trying to get the extra money so that they could give their children at least 1 or 2 hours of therapy a week. So that's the first thing, the extra cost of therapy. The second thing is the extra cost for private schools. Because we don't have a system where, every single child, regardless of position on the autism spectrum, whether low functioning or high functioning, have access to an educational institution. Because we don't have that, and because so many of the children who are lower functioning on the spectrum cannot attend the public primary school or public secondary school, parents are now forced to access education through the private schools, and those are very expensive. So that's two things that add to the regular cost of a normal family. The third thing is accessing medical care. So many, we have a public healthcare system here, but it's so traumatic for many children to go through that public healthcare system, especially special needs children. Imagine a child with autism who might get ill, and parents have to rush that child to casualty, and you are sitting waiting for 4 and 5 hours before you can get service. It's almost impossible for many children. They get meltdown, they get frustrated. Normal children will do the same thing. So you find that a lot of parents now have to put aside that extra money for medical care. And I give you an example. Recently, we had a parent who needed to extract a tooth for a child. And, when she went to the private dentist, she had to put her child on put the child to sleep before they can do anything, because he's a little boy. He would not allow them to get in there and do anything, especially extract. And it costed $10,000. And then the dentist pointed out that for a normal child, that bill would have been $600. So it's a big difference when you're talking about a child with autism and a neurotypical child, and all those bills add up. In addition to that, many children with autism have sensory issues when it comes to food. So they have very specific diet. You have those who would only eat certain food items. You have those who might need to get all the extra supplements such as Pediasure and Ensure and these things on a regular basis. And again, all those things add up. So the cost of taking care of a child with autism is very high when you compare it to a neurotypical child. And as I started off by saying, every parent wants to give their child the best possible. And when you now have parents and caregivers who cannot afford to do that and cannot afford to give their child what they need to, it leads to an extra set of stress. And, parents now think that they're failing their children. And that's a really sad situation we're talking about.
Yeah, I understand completely, and I'm glad you were able to share uh, not only the costs, but to really outline what the additional types of support are, so that even if there's a parent who is looking on now that is in that beginning stages of maybe seeking diagnosis or just had a diagnosis done, if they hadn't received the information before, certainly this would have been a really great learning moment. Now, even as we continue, I want to get to Germaine again. So let's get our studio switched to her. And I want you to share with us, please,
Mhm.
acceptance and empowerment. You know, for a lot of parents, it's sometimes a shameful experience, a stressful experience. They go into denial. You mentioned some parents, they just don't want to deal with it. But could you share, whether from your perspective and even what you understand to be the perspective of other parents, what that experience was like in terms of having to accept? And when you accept, what exactly is it you're accepting? And how do you empower yourself dealing with such heavy news?
Okay. So to accept, you have to realize that, okay, this is what's going on. You can't change it. It's already happening. So it's either you deny it or you accept it. Denying means that child does not, I won't say get better, but they can't deal with what's going on either. So they have to fumble, and things are not going to get better. It's going to get worse if you deny. When you accept, you have to understand, okay, I accept this diagnosis. That means I have to do everything in my power to help this child, to get them everything they need to succeed, to be better, to feel better, to do better. So you get that diagnosis, you think about it, you may cry, you may get angry, you may be in denial for a while. At the end of the day, you have to accept it and say, okay, this is what's going on. And you think about it, you may leave the doctor, they may tell you, you know, this is what's going on, take your time, this is what he needs, but you don't have to do it right now, depending. So you think about it, you go home, you may talk it over with your spouse, with your family, whoever is your support system. And then you decide, okay, this is what I have to do. So let's get on the ball. You decide, all right, he needs speech therapy. That's where we're going to start. You start doing. And when you start doing what is needed, it's more acceptance that he is different or she is different than the typical child. That's also a part of acceptance. Getting them the help is also a part of accepting this diagnosis. So when you decide to do these things and you decide to get them help and you go out and you get the help, then and you learn what exactly this diagnosis means and what the treatment means for this child. That shows that you understand that this is what is needed to get the help that this child needs.
And in the area of empowerment,
Uh,
what was that process like for you, if it was a process at all, to move from what may seem to be defeating news to being empowered, even in the face of dealing with that diagnosis?
it kind of just flowed together. It wasn't something separate. Once you started getting all the services and everything, it was just a direct flow. It was just
Got
a
it.
flow. You didn't, I didn't even think about, okay, yes, this is helping. This is me. I'm doing this. It's not even in my thought process. It's
I
just a, just
understand.
a flow. You go from one, you go past you start with the therapy, you go to behavioral therapy. The behavioral therapy is done. He's done. You don't even think that, okay, we made it through behavioral therapy. He doesn't need it anymore. You just keep going and going and going, and then things just get better. Gradually, things get better, and you don't even process that. 6 months ago he wasn't doing this. Now he's doing this. It takes a long time for you to get to that. Until somebody mentions it, you don't really think about it when you're in it.
Yeah. I understand. And just to go across to Dr. Mahase for a moment, Dr. Mahase, what information can you share, even as we think about acceptance and empowerment? What information can you share as it relates to parent support structures in Trinidad and Tobago? I know that, of course, Support Autism T&T is part of that parent support structure. But even as we look at maybe public service options and other options, can you share a bit on that for our parents?
So we don't really have much public service options, but we do have a few NGOs in Trinidad who advocate for individuals with autism. Now, as I mentioned, Support Autism T&T was established especially to create opportunities. So our whole thing with parent support is our secondary goal. Our primary goal is to make sure that the children have opportunities, that they have events to come to, that they can attend, they can come to the mall and see Santa in a sensory setting, those kind of things. But inadvertently, when parents come to our event with their children, they get to meet other parents and they get to share their stories and they get to talk to other parents and they also get to talk to us. So the while the parent support is secondary, they still do have that option. But there are other groups in Trinidad that are also specifically geared towards parent support. We have the Trinidad and Tobago Autistic Society, for example. And I know that, in those other groups, they offer counseling, they offer an avenue for parents to sit and discuss things. More and more in Trinidad, we have been seeing where different organizations, private individuals, whether it's NGOs or other groups and organizations, they have been coming together to offer more and more seminars and more workshops and so on for parents. So it's there. It's intermittent, sad to say, but it is there. And it is something in the last couple of years that we have seen happening more and more. The only thing with that is that so many of these workshops and seminars and, the opportunities for parents to get that extra support are based in the urban centers. So parents from rural area, from far geographic areas, certain geographic areas are completely left out from that whole process. And then in addition to that, it's very difficult for a parent, especially say a single parent, to leave their child somewhere and attend a seminar or attend a parent training session. So, and most of these sessions don't offer child care, for example, while it's happening. So we still have some things that can be done, but at the same time, it is happening more and more. And I think that's one way Trinidad and Tobago is progressing when it comes to supporting parents of children with autism, and when it comes to autism on the whole. We are a new organization. We have only been around 6 years, but in that 6 years, I have seen such a change in that autism is now in the public sphere. Everybody is talking about it, and not just for April anymore when we celebrate Autism Awareness Month. We keep hearing it all the time. There are more attempts to do things for individuals with autism. So the progress is slow, but it is happening.
I understand. Thank you. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to go into our Q&A session. So let's pull Germaine back in, and let's get into these questions. And the first question asks, and I guess this would be directed to Dr. Mahase, is there any financial support from the government for the parent or a child who has autism?
The parent can access a disability grant from the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. But at the same time, while saying that, you need to pass a means test. And the means test means that they look at the income of the family. So it's not a grant that is just available because the child has a disability.
It's not automatic.
It's not automatic. And we have had many situations where we have a single parent whose income is just a few $100s above the means, the cutoff point for the means test, and they fail the means test. But there is the disability grant, and that is really about the only support that we can find.
And can you quickly mention how does one go about accessing or applying, whether for the grant or for the means test to be applied? What is the process there, if you could share?
So they can apply at any office of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. Their website actually have all the required documents and so on. You fill out a form, you go in, you make an appointment, and they will give you an appointment to come back to screen you. It's a long, drawn-out process, but that's one of the positive changes that we are seeing happening. We are seeing where even the ministry is now starting to realize, mainly because of advocacy by different groups and individuals, that there is a greater need to help parents and to help children. So, they have started trying in their way. But the thing is, with all government ministries in Trinidad, they lack the resources, they lack the manpower to speed up things like application for special need grants and so on. So while we see them trying, they still have a long way to go in reaching out to families who really need the help. And the means test is something that was only implemented last year. And the means test, when the means test started, it meant that a lot of children who were accustomed to getting grants, their grants were cut.
Wow.
So, we have a lot of issues within that little ministry, within that whole thing about the grants to sort out still. And I should mention that the disability grant for a child under 16 is $1,500 TT dollars. $1,500 TT dollars does not help in any significant way. It doesn't help in any significant way in terms of therapy, in terms of school, in terms of anything. But that is literally the only thing that you can access at this point.
I understand. But even though I think maybe we have to take it that while it helps very little,
It is something.
given all the challenges that you've shared with us, little is still better than absolutely nothing. Because as you mentioned, there are some children that, while it may not be able to pay for significant therapy and so on that they need, depending on your household, it may be able to provide for some of your basic physiological needs and so on. I understand.
Yes, and
Our next,
we
sorry,
have
go ahead.
parents who, sorry,
No,
we
go ahead,
have
go right
parents who
on.
actually use the grant to pay for the school or to pay for a couple of hours of therapy. So yes, it's
Yeah,
a little, but they make, parents are very, they make it work.
resourceful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. So our next question asks about support mechanisms that are in place for families. So I guess Dr. Mahase, this comes to you as well. What support mechanisms are there in place for parents with an autistic child?
You see, and again, it goes back to just what is available within the NGOs. Because
Right.
as I mentioned, as I think I mentioned before, we don't have any structured system in place to give counseling to parents. It's only in recent times we have seen more attempt being made again by the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services to offer seminars and to offer counseling by phone and so on. But that's a new thing, and that was developed really because of COVID-19 measures,
Yes.
when we realized that parents were really struggling to make ends work with their children home, with you constantly having to be there 24/7 for your child. It's only recently that we see that kind of support coming in place. And but other than that, the bulk of the support comes from the NGOs. And I mean, to be clear, I think we have reached the stage where the government need to work more with the NGOs to reach the families and to reach the parents who really need the help. That disjointment between government and NGOs need to be breached, because at the end of the day, the NGOs are the ones who are in touch with the parents. We understand the struggles of the parents because we are the ones that they talk to about everything. So we there needs to be lot more work and a lot more communication between government and NGOs, so that more can be afforded to parents and families with children with autism, with an individual with autism. The same thing
Oh,
goes for siblings. We have no kind of counseling services in place for the siblings of children with autism. They
Mm,
go through their own problems and their own issues, having a brother or sister with autism.
yeah.
And I mean, in most cases that we have seen, siblings tend to be the strength behind the child because they get their brother or sister to do so much that parents don't get them to do. They really work with them. They develop very close relationships with their brothers and sisters. But that doesn't mean that they don't get emotional stress, or they don't feel the psychological impact of having a special needs child in the family. So
Yeah.
we need that as well.
I understand. And our last question says, what advice would you give to a parent who may not have the kind of support needed for a child with autism? Germaine, would you have any contributions to make towards this question?
That's a broad question, to be honest. It could mean so many things. You have to have, like I said before, you have to have a lot of patience. You have to understand what it is you're dealing with first. If you don't understand, you can't help that child. You have to understand. You have to get your support system. You have to have people to back you. Sometimes you just need 5 minutes alone. So you have to have somebody there to take over for a few minutes, especially if you're a single parent. Sometimes there's nobody in the house but you and that child. You
Yeah.
have to be able to say, can you come sit with him for half an hour if you just have to go outside? I do that all the time. Otherwise, I will go crazy, literally.
Got
So
it.
you have to have not just medical support and with therapies and stuff. You have to have personal support as well.
Yeah.
Whether whether you have a spouse and family or you just have friends, you have to have a break away from that. You have to have a little alone time, a little me time, or a little friend time where you don't think about the stress of dealing with this problem. And it is a problem. It's not the child that's the problem, it's the diagnosis that you have to deal with.
Got it. And we have one more question that we're sneaking in that came last minute. What is parent-child relationship like now, seeing that a diagnosis was made and you know what is taking place with your child? So I believe they're trying to ask, after diagnosis, to what extent does that affect the parent-child relationship, if at all? Open question.
It actually does get a little bit easier once you know what you're dealing with. It doesn't take away the problem, but now you have a better understanding a little bit of what that child is going through. Now you understand that his behavior comes from the fact that he can't tell you what's going on, or he can't tell you what he wants. So you understand a little bit, and then you decide, okay, he's not really angry at me. He's not misbehaving because he wants to misbehave. It comes, his actions are, it's just a reaction to what's going on. So you get a little more tolerance. You do develop a little more patience, whether you want to or not. And then it does get a little easier. Then you learn to communicate a little bit better. You'd be like, okay, calm down. Let's see what you want. You try to help him, and it does get easier. And then he calms down, and then you talk softly so that he realizes if he's screaming and then you're screaming, nothing works.
Right.
So it does get easier. It takes a while. You don't even know when it happens. It just
Got it.
happens.
And Dr. Mahase, any contributions to this?
So, like Germaine said, once you have that diagnosis and you understand what you're dealing with, it helps. It goes a long way. But then at the same time, we have another set of parents. We have those who, once they get that diagnosis, they go into denial. But eventually, I think in both situations, once the parent accept that this is my child, that my child is different from other children, that my child is special and unique in his own way, that kind of bond is something that goes very deep. But it
Mhm.
comes from understanding and accepting that this is my child. Whether my child speak or not, whether my child become a scientist or not, I love my child unconditionally, and I will do whatever to make sure that my child lives a healthy, happy life as far as possible. So I think once you have that kind of acceptance and understanding, everything changes,
Yes.
because now you become an advocate. You're now trying to fight for the rights for your child.
Mhm.
Especially here in Trinidad, we see that so many parents become advocates because they have no other choice. They have to advocate for a simple thing as people staring at their children when they go to the mall.
Mhm.
You learn to fight, you learn to become stronger and to deal with all the things that your child deserve to have a better place.
Mhm.
I understand. So, German, Dr. Mahase, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you spending this time sharing once again. Invaluable. The information. I know that the mummies, daddies, aunties, and uncles out there, they're taking away a whole lot from this episode. So I really appreciate. Thank you for taking time to join with us once again on the digital show.
It was my pleasure.
Definitely a
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Nice
And
to meet
mummies,
you, Mahase.
sorry, yes, German.
I was just saying it was nice to meet Dr. Mahase.
Yeah.
It's nice to meet you, Germaine, and great job. Your son seems to be doing so well. Congratulations.
Yes, I
I mean,
must say I am very proud.
yeah, it must have taken a lot for you to get him to this stage. So you keep going. He's going to shine.
I've had a good support system, I must say.
Oh,
I must say his
Yeah.
teachers, I can't say enough about his teachers, and his
yeah.
therapist has known him for 10 years now. She's been working with him. So I can't say enough.
Oh, that's
My
Yeah.
only thing
wonderful.
is I wish Trinidad had more resources, because I know how hard it is. It's hard even when you have the resources. So I cannot
Mhm.
imagine what some of these parents go through without having the resources and the financial backing, because it is not cheap. Even here, the we have insurance, but we also have copays, and just the copays alone can break your back. So I can't even begin to imagine. But perseverance and hard work, that's
Mhm.
I mean, hopefully somebody hears and sees this segment that can help or contribute or, give some kind of financial backing to this organization that can help these parents, because they do need it. Their parents need it more than you can think, because without it, these kids are not gonna they're not gonna thrive, and they can. It's not that they cannot. They can't if they don't have the resources, if they don't have the help.
Yeah.
We,
So, ladies,
sorry, I
yes.
was
No,
going to
go
say
ahead,
that
doctor.
progress is coming very slowly in Trinidad. But as I said, in the
Right.
last 6 years, I have seen, I've seen with the constant advocacy and so on, I'm seeing where government is starting to take notice, where autism is being discussed more in the public domain.
Right.
So we have a long way to go, but we're
Mhm.
getting somewhere at least.
Good.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
once again, thank you for joining in. And we want to thank the parents, the moms, the dads, aunties, and uncles who join in faithfully each week, whether through the live stream or through the replay. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. Reminding those who are new to the programming that it's a bi-weekly talk show and it is streamed digitally every Wednesday and Sunday right here on this channel. Those of you who come in every week, I'm sure by now you've clicked that like button, you've clicked that subscribe button, you've clicked that notification bell. I'm a pause. So just in case you haven't done it, you can do it now. I'll pause again. Like, follow, subscribe. This way you support us and you help share the word about the work that is being done. Once again, we appreciate you taking your time to tune in to yet another episode of the Caribbean Parenting Digital Show. And until next time,